Good day. The M1911A1 is by far one of the most legendary pistols of all time, and has been continuous manufacture since 1911. Really, its only rival is the Smith & Wesson M&P 10 that has been continuously manufactured since 1899. The M1911 was designed by the legendary John Moses Browning, and this thing took about 10 years to develop and a few military trials to work out all the kinks, and ultimately, by the year 1911, you had not this. The pistol that went into World War I was slightly different, and after learning the lessons of World War I, the 1911A1 was created by basically adding a longer beaver tail and a few internal changes. Since 1911, this pistol has maintained popularity amongst the populace, and that's mainly because it's just a very nicely designed pistol. The ergonomics are absolutely exquisite, with even modern designs still copying them. Now, what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is a Rock Island Armory 10mm M1911. Now, this is what's also considered the government model. You've got a 5-inch barrel, you've got military sights, you've got no slide cuts, no nothing, just a no-frills 1911. We'll get into the 10mm in a little bit. Now, the original 1911 would be chambered in 45 ACP, which itself was developed out of the 45 Schofield cartridge. 45 ACP was good, but it had velocity issues, but that was offset by a lot of mass. Now, this is a single-action pistol, meaning you have to pull back the hammer in order to fire. You also have the toggleable safety, which is absolutely exceptional in terms of ergonomics. There is some tactic bros that say, like, oh, you'll get killed in the streets by that. Or you could get some training instead of just posting on Instagram how cool you look. Now, this was manufactured by Rock Island Armory and is nothing short of exceptional. Rock Island Armory is able to make very inexpensive firearms, but they don't really skimp on quality. The first Rock Island Armory firearm I ever had was a M200, and it was just a basic 38 special revolver, and it always worked and continues to do so. This is just a basic 1911 that worked right out of the box and continues to do so, which evidently is not altogether that common when it comes to certain 1911s. Some more expensive 1911s have break-in periods and things of that nature, whereas this, I took it out of the box and shot it, and there weren't any problems. In fact, evidently this thing's a bit more reliable than the Ruger 10mm, which is kind of surprising. So, the only real issue with Rock Island is just the fact that their finish is a little thin and can scratch up pretty easily. The M200 revolver has a few finish mars that I don't really like, but that's about it, and that's something I can live with. Now, the 10mm auto cartridge is what really sets this thing apart from the traditional 1911. The 10mm auto was developed in the 1980s and was a bit of a meme round for a while. Everybody thought this was going to somehow replace the 9mm, and it didn't do that, but it didn't die either. A lot of cartridges come and go, but this thing was able to endure, and now it's not necessarily mainstream, but it's not really a niche caliber either. Now, this was developed out of the Miami-Dade shootout, and when you really dig deep into that, it really didn't matter what guns they had. It was just a whole cluster of errors, more or less. The 10mm was thought to be something that you could put down somebody on the PCP. I guess you could do that, but it was determined that the 10mm was too powerful for smaller frame shooters, which is kind of funny because two of the people that shoot this gun in the upcoming shooting footage are smaller frame shooters, and they handled it pretty well. But ultimately, it was determined that smaller frame shooters couldn't use it, so they came out with this, the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge, or as it's derisively known, the 40 Short and Weak. And the 40 Short and Weak was supposed to be, you know, an easier pistol to shoot than the full-size 10mm, and smaller frame shooters could use it. But then, different organizations determined that this was too expensive, and so they all went back to 9mm. The end. Ultimately, 10mm got pretty popular for a little bit amongst a certain segment of shooters. Media picked up on it, so you saw 10mm in all sorts of video games and movies and books and things of that nature, but ultimately this never really supplanted 9mm in any meaningful way. Now, 10mm is a big, powerful cartridge. We're talking 357 Magnum levels of power. And due to this, there are a few changes with this pistol. For one, this thing is big and heavy. But then again, that's what I wanted, because I wanted a bloody hand cannon. Now, in order for this thing to not beat itself to death, it has a very stiff recoil spring. If you're not used to big, heavy recoil springs, you might have some difficulty getting that bloody slide back. Also, disassembly is going to be different because you have this big, heavy recoil spring. Essentially, what you have to do is you have to take a paper clip. There's a little hole in the guide rod. You're not going to be able to see it on camera, but there's a little hole in the guide rod. You stick the paper clip in there, you send the slide forward, and then you take the slide off. If you don't do that, this thing's going to go shooting off into space. It's a trade-off, so you don't have your gun beat itself to death. Colt came out with the Delta Elite back in the 80s, and it didn't have that kind of guide rod, and it didn't have that really stiff spring, and it beat itself to death all the time. Now, the magazines we're going to be using today are we have the factory mag here. This is an 8-round magazine, and it fits flush, but has a little rubber bumper on the bottom. That can be removed, but I like it well enough. The original 1911 mags were 7 rounds, but pretty much these days when you buy a 45 ACP 1911, you're going to get an 8-round magazine. And we're also going to be using 10-round Cobra mags. The Cobra makes it sound cool. These project quite a bit from the grip, but hey, you got 10 rounds, which is cool. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be shooting some 180 grain Full Metal Jacket Magtex and some 180 grain hollow points. And I'm doing this primarily to test if this works with hollow points. Not all 1911s do work with hollow points, but this one, being of modern manufacture, should. We're going to be shooting this from a distance of 25 and 7 yards. And so with that, let's head out to the range and have some fun. Oh yes, ladies and gentlemen, this thing is a beast. And it's accurate and reliable, but I wasn't surprised. It was able to utilize all those hollow points quite well, and I think those hollow points were honking out of there just a little bit faster, because there was a lot more muzzle flash coming off of there with those bloody things. This is a gun I bought primarily just for fun. And one thing I do want to point out before I forget is this. That grip safety is often maligned, and there's another YouTube video talking about how this was hard to engage, and I tested it, and it worked just fine for me. So, perhaps he had an earlier Rock Island pistol? It's hard to say. But ultimately, this was mainly meant as kind of a meme gun, but I gotta say, I'm very impressed with this pistol. I was able to get some really good hits out at 25, and also, as we can see, smaller frame shooters can utilize this quite effectively. So I'm not sure where they got the smaller frame shooters can't handle this. I think it was, this cost more than 9mm, so it was the smaller frame shooters. That's what it was. But yeah, even though it's a meme gun, this thing's a hell of a lot of fun to shoot. Like, when you shoot this thing, you know you're shooting something with some power. You're playing with power. Superpower. But it's not quite as obnoxious as 44 Magnum. I personally have a Ruger New Model Super Blackhawk. There's a review of it up on the channel. And that thing is fun for like one cylinder. And then it just starts to hurt. This thing, you could just blast all day if you were made of money. And so this thing's pretty good. I would highly recommend, if you want like a big blaster, that's one to look at, because it's actually fun to shoot, and you can get the enjoyment of just a massive amount of flame and recoil off of this thing. And it doesn't break the bank. This particular pistol was picked up for about $400. That was it. Ultimately, that's one of the reasons why I went ahead and snapped it up as fast as I did, was because $400 for a 10mm? Sold! Now, this does actually have some practical purposes. Despite it being a single stack, this would still make for a fairly decent defensive firearm, more leaning towards wild animal defense. If you went into bear country and you had some really full power 10mm loads, this would definitely be good for bear defense. This would also be good for general wild animal defense. I suppose you could conceal carry this for just individual defense, but I would still say that 10mm is just a bit overkill for that sort of thing, but it still would certainly work. And overall, this is just an absolutely exceptional pistol. Like, I expected it to be good, but I didn't realize just how fun it would actually be. Now, for next time, we're going to be taking a look at a firearm that was meant to replace the 1911 back in World War II. Oh yeah, ladies and gentlemen. Next time, we're taking a look at the M1 carbine. But for now, I am General Otts, wishing you good M1911, A1, and good M1 carbine, whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing, and please consider leaving a like or a comment, as the algorithm desires your soul. And I want to thank all those fans who have supported this channel, both past and present.